Hello, everyone. Welcome to WaveTalkers Live. I'm Chris Mattia. My amateur radio call sign is Whiskey 6 Alpha Hotel. Today, we are talking about PACE plans. PACE plans are it's a communication plan, but it also for operations. It can be for either of those two. And we're breaking these down into four common categories: primary form of communication or operations, your alternate plan, what happens when you have to go to your alternate plan, the trigger points and so forth. We'll talk about a contingency plan for going down another stage, as well as an emergency plan. Now, with all of your PACE plans, you want three key features. You want to make sure that you can maintain operability for whatever your operation happens to be. You want to make sure that you can maintain interoperability between you and any of the other teams that are working on that particular incident or whatever the event happens to be. And you also want to sure that within each of the stages of your plan, you can maintain continuity of the operations that need to happen. Those are the three key things that you need to keep in mind. And there's a couple of other key ideas. So the first is you want to make sure that every one of your stages is feasible, meaning you've got all of the equipment, you have enough personnel to implement each different stage of your PACE plan. You want to make sure that you have enough trained personnel that are familiar with all of the different stages of your plan. You want to make sure that your plan is acceptable to the overall operations. Is it going to support the mission and be able to keep the mission moving forward? You want to make sure that it's suitable, that you're not going into some other method that's just not going to work out for you. Make sure that all of the folks are in agreement that you're able to move forward with each stage of your plan. You want to make sure that your plan is distinguishable from one stage to the next, so you don't have dependencies. So say your primary form of communication is your cell phone, and then your alternate is you're going to use the data plan on your cell phone. If your cell phone's out, you're not going to be able to use the data plan on there. So you want to make sure you've got some clear separation between each of the different stages, so you don't have any dependencies that are going to cause a particular stage of your plan to fail. You also want to make sure that your plan is complete. And you want to make sure that it's written out, it's documented well, and you have clear trigger points. So you know when you're on your primary plan, if you hit a particular trigger point, if something happens, you know that everybody knows at that point we're going to the alternate plan, or we're going to go from the alternate plan to the contingency plan. So that's what we're going to be spending our time today talking about, is PACE plans here on WaveTalkers Live. Now, before we dive into the rest of the show, we always have folks send in a Winlink check-in. So if you have access to Winlink, go ahead and send us a Winlink check-in. Send it to all four of our call signs. They are Whiskey 0 Delta Hotel Golf, November Radio 6 Victor, Kilo Mike 6 Radio Foxtrot Bravo, and Whiskey 6 Alpha Hotel. Send it to all four of our call signs, as well as our tactical address, which is WaveTalkers. We want to make sure that you're using the standard Winlink check-in form for those check-ins. Make sure that you have the current date and time set on the form when you go to send it in. You want to make sure that you select the correct band and session that you're going to be sending it in. At the end of the show, we're going to map all of these check-ins, and we're going to be able to show whether or not you've checked in via the internet using a telnet session, or you've sent it in via RF. You want to also make sure that in the comment section of the form, you're going to answer the question that we have. Describe one of your PACE plans. Now, if you don't have a PACE plan, just go ahead and let us know that. But this is what we want you to go ahead and send that in. At the end of the show, we'll step through the process of mapping this out, and we'll see where everybody is coming in from all over the world. And I am joined today by both Scott, Cam6RFB, and Dan, NR6V. David is out on assignment for this week as well. So before we get into the full topic for today, I want to just take just a second, remind everybody that we have our new Learn Morse Code, the Basics course. It is available right now on courses.wavetalkers.com. We're really excited to get this course out. We're getting a lot of feedback from folks, how much they're enjoying it, how much it works as just a standalone course for learning Morse code, as well as a companion to many of the other lessons and methods that folks are using to learn Morse code. So we're getting a lot of great feedback. We do have a special that's running on the early bird special, and it expires at the end of this month, January 2025, and it is set for UTC time. So be sure to lock in the best price that you can get on that. It's available right now, courses.wavetalkers.com. And with that, let's dive in a little closer into our PACE plan. Now, a PACE plan always starts off with the primary form of communication or operations. This is the best method. It's the intended method that your operation is using on a daily basis. And it doesn't matter whether or not it is a communication plan or it's just an operation plan. This is the main way that you're set up and you're structured and you're operating. If something were to fail, if you needed to have your backup, and this is what many of us have, we have our primary and then we have our backup. Now, in the PACE plan world, this is called an alternate methods. Now, these alternate methods are oftentimes a little bit less optimal. They may take a little bit longer. They may take a little more resources in order to be able to implement. They may take they're going to need to take some different technology or different practices in order to implement them so that they're not dependent on what happens with the primary system. If your primary system fails and goes down, you want to be able to easily switch over to your alternate system. Again, you need to make sure that you and every member of your team are well practiced in what you need to do to implement that alternate layer. Now, within the alternate plan, if that one were to fail, let's go to the backup for the alternate plan. That's going to be your contingency plan. Now, most often with a contingency plan, this method is definitely not as fast or convenient and sometimes not even as reliable, but it will allow you to accomplish the task. And there are some examples that we're going to walk through in just a little while, which will go into a little more detail and of explaining how your contingency plan may come together and how you would go about implementing that. So that's the C in PACE. The last one is your emergency plan. Now, this is your method of last resort. Now, emergency plans, they will oftentimes cause additional delays, or they might otherwise affect the general form of your operations. Now, what are we talking about here? Well, let's say you get down in your communications plan and amateur radio is down at your emergency level. It's one of your forms of last resort that you need to be able to go to. A lot of us as hams will oftentimes say, this is, amateur radio when all else fails. We're down to this as to what we're doing. When you go to an emergency plan, you'll often have to be very specific in your communication because it might take a little bit longer. You might have to relay. You might have to have a runner go through and carry messages from one location to another. So you've got one folks that are going to be doing the sending of that traffic, one group that is going to receive it on the other end, and then they may have to print that out or write it out and send it on. When you have that slower chain of communication, you oftentimes have to be very, very precise in how you're sending that information. This is a great place for things like forms that really document and formalize the information that's being sent from one location over to another. That way, if you have any questions on what the information is, then it's going to be filled out in that form. Because if you have to send, if you're doing voice communication, for instance, and you have to call back on a net and say, hey, can you please repeat that at some of the higher levels of your PACE plan, that might work just fine. But once you get down to your emergency level, it can oftentimes take several steps to be able to get a message from one side to another. And you may need to make sure that that is really formalized so you don't have to say, can you give me a repeat, and then run through all the way to the chain back up to the other person and then send that traffic all the way back down. So what I want to do to get us started is I want to walk through a very simplified and commonly used PACE plan that we can all relate to. And that is our Friday night dinner that we'll oftentimes have. And for our Friday night dinner, we usually have pizza. That's our primary plan that we have on our regular, every single week. We have at the end of the week, we've been working hard. We don't want to have to cook. We don't want to have to do anything else. So we go ahead and we order a pizza from our local pizza place. Now, this episode is not sponsored by Marco's. That just happens to be the local pizza place that I enjoy. It's right here near my house that we have. Now, when we start thinking about this PACE plan for our Friday night dinner, we have identified what is our regular operation that we're sending our information through. We're doing this by calling and ordering a pizza through Marco's. And there's various different ways that we can place that order. We can use the internet because Marco's has a really good website that I can go to and I can choose exactly what everybody in the house wants to have on their pizza. We can order a specific type. We can really customize the order from week to week. It's very easy to be able to do that. That's one of our primary forms of communication. But oftentimes within a primary layer, you'll have various different methods or options that you can choose from. So we also have the option of being able to call the vendor and say, hey, we want to order a pizza. And we just read that over the phone. Works really well. We can also send an email, and in fact, we did a show on how to order a pizza with a Baofeng. You can check it out on our YouTube channel, where we sent a Winlink message and we were able to send that in via email and be able to order our pizza and then go and pick it up. So that's something that it's another method that we have in order to get through that. And then, of course, you have various different options for receiving the response back. So our pizza place has a delivery option. We can just choose to have that show up and the pizza will just show up at our house. We don't even have to do anything for that. It works really, really well. And these guys, they're real fast. So oftentimes you'll place an order and they'll say 30 minutes and it's usually there in 15 or 20 minutes. Absolutely love that. There's also the option of us going to the shop and going and picking up that pizza. This will save us a few dollars oftentimes off of the delivery cost, but it helps as an alternate way to being able to go through and order our pizza. We have our primary form of our Friday night dinner already locked in stone. We're ready to go with this, and everybody's on board with it. Now, what is the trigger that would cause us to go to our alternate plan? Well, the trigger happens to be is if our particular store is closed. Now, that the reason that they're closed can vary. Here in Southern California, we oftentimes have power safety shutoff. So if we're having a large storm that's going on, oftentimes the power company will take down sections of the grid, and that can cause whole businesses to go offline, not just the homes that are in the area. So if we reach out, we find out that Marco's is closed, then we instantly trigger the next stage of our PACE plan. And that happens to be our alternate plan. Now, in our alternate plan, we have in our home kitchen, we have an electric oven, and we're able to just make our own pizza. We don't have to go out. We keep our regular Friday night dinner schedule all set up, ready to go. Now, in the home, we have that oven. We have all the different tools that we need in order to make our own pizza. So we've got pizza stones, we've got the pans, pizza cutters, we've got the pizza peel to be able to put the pizza in and out. We make various different types of pizza. All that works. We're able to have our pizza at home pretty much any time that we want. We have a fully stocked pantry that we keep all of the staples that are required to make a pizza on a regular basis. When we go for our regular grocery shopping, we'll make sure that we have any of the fresh vegetables or any of the cheese or any of the various different toppings that we might want to have. We keep all of those stocked both in the fresh form, and we'll often keep some frozen versions of that, so we have it always on hand. Now, we take our alternate plan, and on the first Friday of every month, every single month, we implement our alternate plan at our house. We go through and we make our own pizza. We don't call and order a pizza. We just go ahead and make a pizza. And we use whatever we have on hand to be able to do that. And we all step through the process of making sure that everybody in the house knows how to make a pizza from scratch, how to make the dough, how to make the sauce, how to prepare the toppings and so forth, put it together. Everybody knows what the oven settings are that we need in order to make that pizza. We have recipes that are built out step by step, so everyone is able to do that. So what are our trigger points if we need to go from our alternate plan into our contingency plan? Well, the first is power. As I mentioned, here in Southern California, power is a big thing because we have these big, large wind events. We live in a very fire-prone area, and so we do have these power safety shutoffs from time to time. You might say, hey, well, what about your emergency power plans? Well, we do have a generator that we can use to be able to handle our backup power needs within the house, but we only have a generator that is sized specifically to handle what we consider as our essential items in the home. And our oven requires a lot more power draw than what our generator that we have is capable of putting out. So we do not consider, and this is just by choice, we don't consider our oven to be of high enough priority to make sure that our emergency power plan covers that particular piece of equipment. So if we run into this power outage, that's going to instantly trigger our next level of plan. We also consider our staples that we have, our general stock of whatever ingredients that we have. If we find that we do not have one of the core ingredients, whether it be the flour in order to make the crust, whether it be the sauce components in order to make a basic sauce, or the cheese. Now, one of the things that we also do, we found that you can take your mozzarella cheese and you can freeze blocks of it. So we'll oftentimes have some blocks of the cheese in the freezer. But from time to time, we don't get a full restock. So if we find on our alternate night plan that we don't have either one of the core ingredients or we've lost power, it's that trigger that instantly sends us to our contingency plan. Our contingency plan that we have is that we use our charcoal grill that we have out in the backyard in order to make the pizza. Now, the charcoal grill is set up so that we always keep a bag of charcoal that's on hand, ready to go if we needed to be able to fire that grill up and cook pretty much anything. It doesn't have to be pizza, but oftentimes we'll do pizza as the common thing that we go ahead and prepare on the grill to make sure that we're ready to go there. Now, we have all of those ingredients in our pantry, and we will sometimes make up a pizza from scratch using those ingredients and do it on the grill. So we're practiced in how to do that. But as part of our contingency plan to make sure that we're not reliant on that previous step in our PACE plan, we keep some frozen pizzas in the freezer that are always on hand so we could quickly thaw them out and then we could cook them on the grill. And periodically we'll go through and we'll cook a frozen pizza on the grill to make sure that we're all practiced in how to do that, how to light the grill, get it up and running, and then how to cook effectively on it. Now, we have a regular schedule that we do this on. So we do this by the quarter of the year. So the third Friday of the first month in a quarter, we will set as our grill night, where we will go ahead and we'll fire up the grill, we'll get out all of the equipment, and we will go ahead and make our pizza on that particular night. Now, in the summertime, oftentimes we'll vary that a little bit, and actually we'll cook on the grill a lot more often in the summertime because we go out and we enjoy doing that. We'll cook a variety of different meals on the grill. But this first Thursday of the quarter, we always make our pizza on that night on the grill. Now, what are some of our trigger points? So the trigger point here in Southern California, because we are in a fire climax community, we're very concerned about the threat of fire in this area. So if the wind speed gets to 20 miles an hour on the night that we're planning on grilling, we use that as a trigger point. It's very specific. Once we hit 20 miles per hour on the wind, we automatically will not fire up the grill. We'll go to our emergency backup plan, whatever that happens to be for the night. So we've got a very defined, very specific trigger plan, and we've all agreed that this is what's going to happen. So if we get to this third Friday of the month and the wind speeds are up, we're having some kind of wind event, we want to make sure that we're not lighting the grill and having an open fire set up and potentially causing one of these fires. So we have that as part of our plan. We also will go through and we'll check on this third Friday of the quarter. We'll go through and we'll check all of our various different ingredients. So do we have charcoal? Did we resupply after the last time we did this? Do we have our frozen pizzas that are there ready to go? If the answer is no to either of those questions, that's another trigger point that causes us to go to our emergency plan. So what is the emergency plan? MREs. Meals ready to eat. Now, this is something that you definitely want to have. It's going to accomplish the goal. It's going to get the operations going. Everybody's going to get enough nutrition to be able to do this. It might not be optimal. It might not be fun that we're going to have these MREs. And generally, you're not going to find pizza as an MRE kind of plan that you're going to have. But you want to make sure that even at your exercises that you're running, this was from one of the exercises that our team participated in. Part of that exercise for this 24-hour exercise was everybody at the exercise was having MREs, and it made sure that we all knew how to cook the food in the MREs. We didn't need any additional equipment that was set up to be able to do that. We all had a better idea after going through this experience of what that experience was going to be like. With our regular family plan for this, we schedule the last Friday in the 11th month of the year to be our MRE, our emergency plan practice night. Now, why do we do this? Well, the last Friday in November is a big sales day. It happens to be called Black Friday. And so there are lots of sales and lots of different things. So by scheduling this time for us to practice at our emergency plan, it gives us the opportunity to go in and check our emergency supplies, make sure we have everything in line. We'll go through all of the previous MREs that we have. We'll check the ones that have the oldest dates or those closest to expiration, and we'll go ahead and we'll consume those at that time. So we have a good practice to what's going on. And on that particular day, usually we're able to find the discounts for buying the supplies and resupplying our stocks to make sure everything's rotated, everything's ready to go. That's our overall plan. We actually have these printed out as a small card that we keep in the kitchen, so everybody knows here's what the primary, the alternate, the contingency, and the emergency plan has. We all know what our trigger points are for being able to force us to go to the next stage in our plan. And what we want to do is we want to really encourage all of you to do the same. Build out a PACE plan for each of your different operational functions, on each of your different communication functions. You want to make sure that your plan is complete. It really does flow from all of these different stages. If you'll notice, all of these stages are completely independent, using alternate methods, alternate tools, alternate supplies that do not rely on the stage above. So with that, what I'd like to do now is I want to bring Scott up to go through some of the various, some examples of this that is related more to communications and to some other things. So Scott, what do you got for us?
Yeah. Hey, Chris. Great topic. And boy, I'm getting hungry real quick here. But PACE plans are really an essential part of what we do in disaster management, not just communications, not just one thing. And in reality, we call these business continuity plans in some worlds. We call them disaster planning in others. But the reality of it is, we all do PACE planning to some degree. But how can we refine it to be more effective? So I'm going to talk a little bit about communications PACE plan. And so what does that look like? So for one of my PACE plans for communication is my primary method is a cell phone. This is the go-to method that all operations personnel use as a daily solution. We all do it. We all have our cell phone and we all use it, but we need to make sure that we identify who our carrier is. And that's important because if we know the carrier, we can also send text messages through email and other methods to that, but identifying that carrier. If for some reason that doesn't work, my alternate is going to be a satellite phone. Now, this is a backup method and is not preferred, but may serve as a good workaround until the problem is resolved. Now, it could be sat phone, it could be anything you want it to be, but mine is a satellite phone to be out there. So moving away from that, my contingency is going to be amateur radio. And we're going to get more into how we break this down a little further. But this is a fallback method that is totally different technology and different systems, both from the cell phone, the satellite phone. Now I'm going to RF and trying to communicate through a repeater or point to point if possible. And then the last part of my plan is emergency. Now this is the last resort method. This is a time and place. And what do I mean by time and place? You know, when I talk about the last ditch method, nothing else has worked, and you need to think outside that box. In this scenario, your last ditch effort might be to meet your team members at a mutually agreed upon location at a agreed upon time. And if the person doesn't show up, then maybe you need to leave a note in a pre-identified location and head home. So let me break this down just a little bit further for you. Within each section of our PACE plan, and Chris hit upon it, Dan's going to hit upon it, you need to have subplans within those sections, and again, define some trigger points within there. For example, if we were to link up in our emergency at a time and place with a team member, say at 1200 hours at a prearranged location, and they not show up, well, we don't just leave at 1205 and go, well, they weren't here. As part of our emergency plan, as part of a sub-plan, you spell out that if I'm not exactly there at 1200 hours, wait an hour. Wait till 1300 hours. If you have not heard from me by then, start making some inquiries, you know, as to, hey, has anybody heard from Scott at this point? And then by 1400 hours, if no contact has been made, you may want to notify emergency services. These are known as trigger points. Trigger points are very important and they need to be clearly defined. We've used trigger points in the fire service for years, especially on wildland fires, that says if the fire crosses this line or crosses this canyon, we need to get out of here. This is a no discussion, this is what's going to happen set of parameters. And what this does is it prevents second guessing. It prevents things from happening that could get us into a position that we can't get out of. So you want to make sure that your trigger points are clearly defined and realistic. Don't make them unrealistic and unobtainable. That is only going to breed indecision. It's going to breed indecisiveness, and we don't want that to happen, because the minute that occurs, we start deviating from our plan, and then at this point, our plan is no longer a valid plan. So you want to make sure that this is communicated amongst the group, be it your family, be it your incom group, be it your agency you work with, but make sure this plan is communicated to everybody and it's mutually agreed upon and understood. Someone posted into the chat, well, how about changing repeaters? That could be a sub-plan under the amateur radio side. You know, it didn't have to be amateur radio. I could use, I don't know, MERS. I can use GMRS. I could use FRS. So I could, within my contingency plan, I could have several subsets put together. It just depends on how granular I want to get. And keep in mind, the more granular your plan becomes, the more potential there is for a problem to occur and more detailed out there. So that's kind of a basic look at a communication plan. And I'll kick it back over to Chris.
Thanks a lot, Scott. With that, I'm going to actually jump over to Dan. Dan's going to go through some real world plans that he's been working with. Let me go over to Dan. You're on mute.
Thank you. Okay, so we've talked about PACE plans. We've got the general idea that you have a primary, an alternate, a contingency, and a method of last resort, an emergency plan. So let's apply that to something that's been in the news quite a bit lately, and that's evacuations. How does that apply, or how could you use that to advance your evacuation? I don't know whether this is now universal or not, but what we've adopted here in Southern California for evacuations is a ready, set, go strategy, with ready being your everyday level of preparedness, which you should have in the back of your mind, what would I do if I had to evacuate, and have some things set aside so that if you have to evacuate, the process is easier. And a lot of that is just thinking about what would I do? What documents would I need? What would I need to take? What's irreplaceable? Once you've gotten through the ready part of it and an event occurs, the next thing you're going to get is the set mode, which is an evacuation warning or voluntary evacuations. They've used a lot of different terms over the years. Now we're really using the terminology evacuation warning. And that's your trigger to actually start getting your stuff together, pulling the things that you've thought about in the ready mode together, and loading them in your car if that's your choice of your way to evacuate, which it would be for most of us. Load it into your car, get it ready, and be ready to go so that when that evacuation order comes, you're really, all you have to do is wrap up a few things and get out. And that brings us to the go mode, evacuate now. And that's when you should have all of your stuff, for the most part, done and get out early. The earlier you go, the less likely you are to run into gridlock, the less likely it is that you're going to have blocked roads. And so you really want to be ready to go when that happens. So what would a PACE plan look like for this? You get the evacuation order and you start with your primary. For most people, that's going to be driving that vehicle that you've preloaded with your most important stuff, your family, your pets, your irreplaceable items, and you're going to drive away. Great idea. But you hit a trigger point. In this case, gridlock would be one. The roads are blocked. Either you waited too long or everybody was well prepared and took off at the same time. You can't get through. The road is just impassable. So that's where you would go to your alternate plan. Alternate plan might be return home and get a motorcycle. With a motorcycle, you can ride up on sidewalks, you can go up off road. You have a lot more options with the motorcycle. You can't carry as much stuff. So like alternate plans almost always are, it's less ideal than your primary plan, but it's still better than doing nothing. And so you go home, you grab your motorcycle, and what happens? It won't start. Whether it's you haven't started it recently, or maybe the air's so full of smoke, it just doesn't have enough oxygen to cause combustion, whatever the reason, it won't start. You can't use your motorcycle. So now you've got to go to your next level, your contingency level. And that's, I'm just going to throw on a backpack and I'm going to have my family do the same, and we're going to hike out. So everybody does that. They get everything ready. They walk out the front door, and the fire is on them. The roads are not passable. It's too hot. It's too unsafe. Now, what are we going to do? And the answer to that is maybe you're going to shelter in place. And if you have a swimming pool, you're going to jump in the pool. That's your, hardly ideal, but it's the better of the alternatives available to you. By the way, if you've got stuff in your house that valuable china, for example, when you're getting ready in that set mode, you might want to think about throwing that stuff in the pool. It'll probably survive there, and it's a good place to put stuff that won't be damaged by the water. So, as a last resort, you want to have something that will protect you, just like wildland firefighters have their fire protection blankets or help me out, Scott. What do they call them?
The emergency shelters.
Those would be the fire shelters, the shake and bakes.
You're right. Shake and bakes. Okay. Anyway, this is it's not a good choice, but it's probably the better choice that you have. And so that's a simple plan that would show how you might apply PACE to an operational type of thing. Within each of these levels, you've got choices you can make. In the primary level, when you're driving away, you may have 2, 3, 4 different routes you can take. So if you encounter gridlock in the first direction, you may want to try another. That happened to my nephew and his wife back in the Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa. They got a call, get out now. They still had a landline, which was the only way they really were able to get that notice. And it was get out now. And they literally grabbed a few things, grabbed their dogs and got in 2 cars and started down the road, and it was blocked. The neighbor was there, said, you can't get through that way. Well, they had another way to go that they knew, a back road, and they were able to safely get out that way. So that's a fork within that initial primary level. So you do have choices at each level, but the alternate level with the motorcycle, maybe you want to spend a little time trying to get that motorcycle running, maybe not. Each level has got its own trigger points and decisions within the level, and ultimately you end up maybe in the pool. So that's what I've got, Chris. I'll send it back to you.
Thanks a lot, Dan and Scott, both of you, really good walkthrough. So when you start thinking about creating your PACE plan, keep in mind all of those points that we talked about. Make sure that you're able to maintain interoperability. You've got all the different steps that are in there. You've got those trigger points. Everybody on your team is well practiced. You've got enough people on your team that are practiced in each of the different steps so that people are able to substitute in. You all know what you're going to be doing and where and why you're going to be doing it. So real key, real important things. With that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back down into our check-ins.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Scott.
Before we jump, Danny, KI5EXY, had a really good comment, and I think is worth addressing, especially with what Dan just talked about. And his comment was, how does someone evacuate if they cannot drive and there is no family members nearby? Very good question. And this is part of where you go through this PACE plan, and I was trying to explain to him, is during a blue sky, when everything is calm and peaceful, reach out to your local agency and let them know that you are unable to evacuate and that you don't have family nearby, because they do keep a running log to some degree of these type of people. You don't want to wait till the day of the event and you're trying to evacuate and you're trying to call 911 and say, I can't get out, because the 911 system is overloaded. That's not going to work. But go to reach out to them, let them know what's going on, so they can let other services know that you are unable to evacuate and that you need help. A lot of times counties will ask that if you can't evacuate, put a white sheet outside your house, something so they know that there's somebody there and they can't leave. But find out what your county's plan is for that exact type of circumstance. I can't say for every county, but every county is different. But find out what it is and practice that. Back to you, Chris. Thank you.
And I will comment. I was really surprised listening to the first really 2 days of the Palisades fire. How many people were calling in with exactly that? I'm 96 years old. My house is on fire and I can't get out. Or I'm disabled. I need a wheelchair. I can't get to the wheelchair, and the fire's in my backyard. Obviously, these are people that hadn't planned, or going back to the topic, they didn't have a PACE plan. They didn't have an alternative. Maybe their plan was their relatives were going to come get them, but their relatives couldn't get in because the roads were blocked. And obviously, waiting until your house is actually on fire is probably not even your emergency plan, although I guess it probably was in their cases. But a lot of those really almost constant calls and the IC, when they're dealing with that, they're not dealing with fighting the fire or setting up the next evacuation trigger point. And it really is something that, if that is something that you have a relative or you yourself, talk to your local fire station, find out how they want you to plan for that. Maybe they have a list. The problem I see with that, though, is that if you've got a brush fire, for example, your local fire station is going to be the first one in. They're going to be committed to fighting that fire, and they're not going to be available to come get you. So that may not be the best plan, but any plan is better.
Well, and a lot of times, going to your local fire station, letting them know, they will push that up to the admin side of the stage of the agency, and dispatch may hold that information, or somebody in the prevention side of the house may be holding that information. But it's a plan, nevertheless. And you need to, again, we go back to whatever check with your local agency and pose that question to them and say, how does this work? Based upon that, then develop your PACE plan.
During the mountain fire that happened earlier this last fall, it was in Camarillo, the fire was moving so quickly that the EMS services were having to switch to different stages of their PACE plan, and they hit the trigger point where they were not able to continue fighting the fire. What their primary objective was preservation of life and property. And so all the air support started going in and airlifting people out of their homes that were stuck and not able to get in there. They were sending teams in specifically to evacuate the people out of the area. And so that might be a trigger point that you're having to hit, and you're able to, you transfer through that interoperability, through that unified command, you transfer the responsibility of fighting the fire or fighting the event that's happening to some of the additional resources, and your local resources are going in to just preserve life and property and get people out. There are various different stages that you can implement these different PACE plans. And so you want to make sure you really spend some time thinking these through, talking with the members of your team, members of your family, and figure out what your particular PACE plan is. Now, obviously, we've been talking a lot about fires, but this happens for any different type of an emergency, whether it be power outages, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, tsunamis, all of those sorts of things. You need to really start thinking these through and write them down, figure out what your specific plan is so that you're able to implement it. Now with that, let me go ahead and I'm going to pull the guys down real quick, and we'll go into our check-ins, or check our check-ins here. Oh, I also wanted to mention, I saw a question in the chat go by asking about if part of our plan is to, for our team, our communications team, to be able to meet on a particular repeater, is a good alternate step to go to a different repeater. Well, more than likely, that's actually a switch, unless you're changing bands from one band to another, because oftentimes you could have multiple different repeaters that you can hit, but if both of those repeaters are, say, VHF repeaters, and there's something causing interference on the VHF band, being able to go to another repeater may not be a viable option for you. You might need to go to a UHF frequency, or maybe to a 1.25, which is the 220 band, or maybe even go into HF. Make sure that your various different layers of your plan are not dependent on each other. You break that dependency as much as possible so that you've got that built in. With that, let me jump back into our check-in so we can see which folks have checked in. So if you haven't had a chance to send in your Winlink check-in, go ahead and do it now. I'll run a couple of more of these checks to make sure that we've gotten all of the check-ins that have come in. There's a few more that have just come in here. Each time I run this check-in, it'll pick up some of them. Let me go ahead and run it one more time, see if we had anybody else. There's a couple of more that are coming in, so we'll go ahead and check those in, make sure we've got those. And we'll go ahead and do one more check. Go until we get no more check-ins coming in. There we go. All right, so now at this point, what I want to do is I want to bring up a map of all of the folks who have checked in. So I'm going to go back here into my Winlink. I'm going to click on the little globe icon. I'm just going to bring up the maps and CSV KML files. I'm going to select the check-in form so that everybody has used that Winlink check-in form to send in that check-in. And part of that will allow us to map this out. If you want to see how this works on your own system, there's an option here for messages, and you can map all of the messages that have come into your account through Winlink. But I'm going to leave mine set to the Winlink check-in form down here at the bottom. I'm going to click the display map, and let's blow that out to full screen to see where those check-ins have come in. Let's start with our international folks. It looks like we've got Terry Z01HOG joining us from New Zealand today. Hey, great to see you back in with us. We've got Victor Kilo 2 Sierra Kilo Yankee joining us from Sydney area. We've got Roland Delta Golf 1 Golf Hotel Radio joining us from Germany, and Sierra Mike 7 Yankee Tango November. Now, an interesting thing, this was my first notification on the recent fires that just took place of the Palisades fire. I got a Winlink message from Sierra Mike 7 Yankee Tango November letting me know that the fires were actually going on. And I was so busy doing a lot of other things. I just happened to be checking my Winlink messages. And this was literally the first notification that I really paid enough attention to that something was breaking out. And I immediately reached out to the team and said, hey, what's going on? Dan was already monitoring the traffic that was going on, and we all got our team up and running with tracking what was happening and monitoring all of the situation. So a big thank you to you for sending that in. Let me go ahead and zoom into North America, and we'll see where some of the other check-ins are coming from. We'll come up here and start with our international folks. And if you notice, there's the two different color pins that are showing up on here. If I go up to the set filters option, you can see that we're looking at the check-ins that have come in the past 24 hours. And all of those that are showing up in purple are ones that sent their check-in via the internet. If they're showing up in blue, then all of those check-ins were sent in via RF in one form or another. Let me go ahead and roll over the rest of these here, and we've got several folks that are joining us in various different areas. We'll just roll over each of these so that folks are able to see that we did get your check-in. If you sent in a check-in to us and you're not showing up on the map, then you might want to hang around in the after party here inside of with our live Zoom audience, and we'll figure out why that is the case. Some people may not have updated their forms to the latest version. Folks may not or might be using an alternative system to be able to send in their check-in. So we've had folks that have sent in through some of the other Winlink clients that are out there, and those forms may not be up to date and mapping properly. So there's a lot of things. We will go through that in our after party if folks are in here for that. So make sure we've got everybody up here. We'll roll over all of these check-ins that we have coming in various different spots. Let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit to the Southern California region, because we do have quite a few folks that are down here in this area. I want to make sure everybody's able to see that we did get their check-ins from all the different areas. I might even need to zoom in a little bit tighter, and we'll roll into several of these stations as well. There's Logan, KL6LLB. Thanks a lot, Logan, for checking in, and everyone else who's gotten it. So thanks a lot for doing that. If you find the information that we're putting out to be really helpful, then consider going on to wavetalkers.com. We do have a buy us a coffee link. Be sure you like and leave us a comment inside of our YouTube channel. It really helps spread out, get our content spread to more and more people. Let me go ahead and bring the guys up here, and we'll go around and talk and get any closing thoughts that folks have. So Dan, let's start off with you. Any closing thoughts from today's PACE plan?
I'm kind of new to PACE plans. This was something I've heard you guys talk about a few times in the past, but I really hadn't been exposed to it too much until we started, working this week in prep for the program. I like the idea. I think it's a great idea. It applies to a lot of different things, and I plan to do more work on that, both personally and stuff through the groups that I belong to.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Scott, any closing thoughts from you this week?
Yeah. So I've been dealing with PACE plans for a while, and keep in mind, PACE plans can be used for anything we do, from ordering a pizza to what's my power situation, and so anything in between. And I'll give you a good example. And like Dan said, he's kind of getting exposed to it. I was at a training back east, and in a discussion I mentioned, so what about your PACE plan? And everybody stopped what they were talking about and turned their head and looked at me, and it was like I had spoken a foreign language, and they're like, "What's that?" I said, "What do you mean, what's that?" And I explained it, and they're like, "Well, that's a really good idea." And so I just don't think people, like I said earlier, don't understand what we're calling it now, but they're already doing it in some regards. They just don't know it yet. And so it's just a terminology change. But think about it. It's very helpful, and it helps prevent us from doing knee-jerk reactions, because we've defined the plan.
That's very good, Scott. Thank you very much. Yes, and as you mentioned, a lot of us have been doing this for a very long time in terms of having a primary and a backup plan. What a PACE plan does is it really breaks that down into multiple discrete steps. You really have to think through each of the 4 different stages that are in here to really make sure that you're able, whatever your plan happens to be for whatever you're planning for, can really accommodate everything that you need for your operations. And I'm looking really quickly here in the chat here, and I see there's a note from Steve, KI0KY, and they asked, which do we practice the most often, the A, the C, or the E? What you want to do is plan out with your team to practice each different stage at various different times. For the pizza plan that I laid out, we practice various different stages in the likelihood that we're going to have to go to that plan on a set schedule. So for instance, our alternate plan, we make sure that we practice that once a month on a very regular basis, because that's most likely the step that we're going to have to go to. The next level, the contingency plan, that we're practicing within our family for 4 times a year. Every single quarter, we're running through that process to make sure everybody is very familiar with it. That emergency level is much less likely that you're going to get to that in the particular plan that I've laid out here. If you're in a particular area where it's a high likelihood that you're going to be going to that emergency level, you might want to plan that to practice that more often. Or if maybe your team is focused at one or more levels, make sure that your team is focused on practicing that level with the other levels that are down below. If you're involved with large scale exercises, your large scale exercises should include practice at each of the various different stages where you hit various trigger points in your exercise and you go down to the next level and the next level at each different trigger point, so that everybody during the exercise has a really good experience of practicing all of those. The exercise that I participated in earlier last year, literally the MREs was part of that. The emergency, hey, you're all here, you're here for this amount of time, and everybody needs to know how to fix an MRE, what it's like to eat one, how you go through and use them, and what it's like. So we had a lot of people that were saying like, hey, where's my coffee? Where's my coffee? Well, either you plan to have your coffee there, or you have the instant coffee that's coming in as part of that that MRE, or you learn how to be able to go through that.
You,
Go ahead, Scott. I
Chris,
know you got something else.
one quick thing to add to this before you move on. I'll give you a real life example of how a PACE plan could have worked. And I'm going to change the scenario around just to protect the whole thing. But in a large vegetation fire, several people passed away because they couldn't get out of their garage because the garage door wouldn't open. So let's stop and think about this. The garage door didn't work because the power was out. The car was in the garage. They couldn't get out of their garage. And they froze. They literally froze. So part of that plan could have been get in the car, shove it in reverse, drive through the door. If you couldn't pull the release mechanism and lift the door yourself, so your primary would have been the button on the wall, didn't work. Pull the release mechanism on the door, that didn't work because I can't get the door up. So now my contingency or my emergency would be to get in the car, start it, and drive through the door. So you can start to see by this indecisiveness could lead to fatality very quickly.
Excellent. Excellent. So again, thanks everybody for joining us. If you're here inside of the Zoom with our live audience, hang around. We're going to do the after party. If you'd ever like to join us for the after party, just go to wavetalkers.com and sign up. There's a join us link that's at the bottom of every single page. We send out only one email every single week, and it has the link for our Zoom that week so that you're able to join us. With that, we'll say 7-3 to everyone out there, and we'll see you next week. And we're out. So if folks have questions,